Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. Today I'm speaking with Shityest Disciple. He's actually a good friend of mine, and we keep in correspondence from time to time, so it was a blast to have him on. Unfortunately, I had to end the podcast a bit prematurely because I had to deal with a bit of an emergency, but this podcast really could have gone for hours if I let it. It was still fun having a conversation with him. I think he's absolutely brilliant. So be sure to go follow him on his YouTube as well as on his Twitter, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. As always, I'm your host, Vincent Freeman, and I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Shityest Disciple. Shityest, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. And thank you for may or may not have having me back.
Yeah, it feels weird referring to you as Shityest. It almost seems like I'm calling you a derogatory term, so I'm sorry about that. I don't know what else to call you by.
How about I start off the show explaining where the name comes from?
Oh, that'd be great.
So there's this anime I really enjoy called Kenichi, History's Mightiest Disciple. Actually, I just want to check to see how it's recording the. Say something really quick.
Hey, how's it going? My name is Vincent Freeman.
All right, just wanted to check that. Okay, so History's Mightiest Disciple was an anime, and it was about this kid who wasn't very strong, and he basically did a more traditional MMA. So he learned Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, Chinese Kung Fu, Karate, and Muay Thai. And he also had another master who had his own style. So he had 5 different masters. And also he had one master, but he didn't really train with very much weapons. But in the anime, he kind of goes from being like zero to hero kind of thing. And History's Shittiest Disciple is the exact opposite. So the reason why I called myself that is when I did martial arts off and on throughout my life, and my last teacher, I did the worst when I was with my last teacher. I was with him for 5 years. I did kung fu, and I had a terrible attitude. I had this egoistic, I had this huge ego. I just wanted to see myself as good because in the past disciplines I studied, I did really well. And it was harder for me to learn because I had such a massive ego for my success from other disciplines. And something he said to me is I was the shittiest disciple he ever had. And when I realized that and accepted it, I started actually doing better slowly.
Hmm.
And even though I wasn't learning very quickly, I was actually I was moving at an okay pace. And that's where the name comes from. It's the destruction of the ego. Once you admit that you are shit and you're terrible, it frees you from the emotional restraint of trying to glorify yourself.
Hmm. That's an interesting perspective, and probably I think that's probably a good segue into this the first topic of conversation because your channel focuses. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess a quick synopsis of what your channel focuses on would be something like human well-being or focusing on masculinity, effectively trying for men to better themselves. Is that a good way to describe your channel?
Yeah, the thing is I originally didn't want to do this, but then I started looking around. I saw Coach Red Pill, and I realized how bad the self-help for men really was.
Hmm.
And I was lucky because I had friends that pointed out me to good books such as How to Win Friends and Influence People, How to Develop the Leader Within You by John C. Maxwell. John C. Maxwell is Christian, but he doesn't like the problem is with Christian self-help. Sometimes they put too much lessons in code. So if they sort of tell you a holy Bible story, a Christian will be able to absorb more from that than a non-Christian would.
Hmm.
So it becomes this unfair comparison of conversion of information. So I got like great help with my first books on what to read,
Hmm.
on how to better myself. But unfortunately, the self help can be the slippery slope where you go into the spiral of not only echo chambers but also just terrible information. So yeah, it focuses a lot on masculinity, well being, and I was listening to Bulldog Mindset because I watched him when he was a simple programmer to get programming advice, and then he started making a channel about masculinity and stuff, and philosophy. And I was like, okay, well, I started tuning in once in a while. And then when he started criticizing MGTOW, it was a lot of his videos were terrible. Some of his videos were criticisms of MGTOW and incels. He criticized them of the same thing. Some of them were good, but I realized the same issues that he's criticizing about MGTOW could be said about gangs. It could be said about the alt-right. It could be said about this or that or the third. And then I felt really depressed. And it's like, I felt really depressed because I felt as if society sort of forgets about men until men decide to do something that the mainstream does not want to acknowledge.
Hmm.
For example, joining gangs. That's fine. We just we become numb to it. And then when I started thinking more about it, I thought, why don't I step up and create my own channel and talk about some of this stuff? Because I personally feel like this, what Bulldog was, what John Shaw or Bulldog Mindset was talking about. I think it could be more generally, a lot of his criticisms could be generally said towards a lot of bad ideas.
Hmm. That's interesting. And there's definitely some topics of conversation that I want to touch base with you on here because I was sort of binge watching your channel. And it's interesting because this is a topic of conversation that I'm completely ill-equipped to deal with. I know next to nothing about self-help. The only self-help book I've ever read was a Steve Harvey self-help book. And the only reason why I read it was because I was bored on vacation, believe it or not. But sort of, I'm probably less well equipped to deal with sort of my own personal feelings and the emotional impact that some external factors have on me because as you've mentioned before, as you just recently mentioned, there's some negative aspects to the way that society looks upon men. You said, for instance, men get ignored a lot. And much like with women, where there's some sort of negative expectations on women, there's some negative expectations on men. And some of these have been formulated into the phrase of toxic masculinity, as you've heard. So I want to get first, I want to get your general impressions of what toxic masculinity is, whether or not you believe it, whether or not you think there's any credence to that claim, and whether or not you're sort of distinguishing yourself from there. So you're like what you're saying is different from what a lot of people are claiming toxic masculinity is.
Actually, could we have a quick? I just want to pull up something. If we could have just a really quick pause.
Yeah, for sure.
During this interview, actually, because like the thing is, are we going to have our mics kind of like? Do you want the visual of us talking together? Do you want to have that visual of Discord? Do you want to have that on the video, or are we going to completely get rid of the visual
Oh,
aspect?
so
Because that
so
way I can pull up stuff on my computer, and then we can get rid of the visual aspect.
Oh, no worries. So you're actually my guinea pig. So what I have here so far is that I'm recording my face because you're actually the first person that I'm testing this on right now. I'm recording my visual, like my face through my camera. And then the idea that I was going to do is that I was just going to basically I was going to sync that with the audio and then have your little icon, your shittiest disciple icon at the bottom right image. Because I figured
Okay.
you don't do any video stuff, right?
All right. So I can pull up whatever I want. So one sec. Let me
Yeah, go
just.
for it.
I'm just gonna turn off. Okay. So I'm disabling capture. Okay. So, right. I just wanted to first and foremost. So I apologize for the pause. It's just later on. I know this is going to be brought up, so I just want to have this on hand because when it comes to, I've already published my ideas or my belief on the mindset for courage and strength because it might come up later. But as far as toxic masculinity goes, just give me a sec. I may as well bring this up, like pull this up now sooner than later. So we're gonna go to and okay, one sec. All right. Thank you for your. I really hugely appreciate your patience.
No worries, man. I'm gonna go get another beer real
You
quick.
know, geez,
I drink a lot in case you haven't noticed.
I want to drink too, but I'm like too fucked up.
Well, I shouldn't have laughed at that.
No, no, go ahead, man. I fucking deserve it. People deserve to be fucking laughed at when they're fucking idiots, and I was being a fucking idiot. You there?
Can you hear me again?
Okay, so as far as toxic masculinity goes, so I pulled up my notes. I actually have a note. I have notes on my that I actually personally keep
Hmm.
for my philosophy to keep me in proper direction for my philosophy content. But for toxic masculinity, in short, toxic masculinity and masculinity are the same. So, in one hand, yes, I do believe in the possibility of it existing, and I call this the golden mean of gender. And so, have you ever heard of the golden mean in philosophy, virtue ethics?
No, I haven't. Would you mind?
So, basically, the idea is a balance. So, I believe that there's a golden mean in gender. So, for example, everybody has a more feminine side, a more masculine side. I define feminine objectively. One of the aspects is nurturing, Now, if I had to take a guess, all this shit are just guesses on femininity. I'd say beauty, grace, and fertility, and I'd say catering. And when I mean catering, I mean like women used to cater to men, housework and whatnot. But even in modern day and age, women will cater to other women, their looks, compliments. Men do that too, but that's try and get laid. They're not really trying to cater. They're just trying to, get in. But
Hmm.
masculinity, the thing is with masculinity and femininity is like if you're trying to be too macho, too tough, too strong, if you're trying to be like really, really, overcompensate alpha male-ish, then yeah, you're being toxic. It's a little bit too much. I think we all have a balance, but I think another aspect, it isn't just masculinity. It's morals. It's morals. It's framework. It's tradition. It's how we're brought up. Like, yeah, sure, for men, we're more likely to perhaps act out in a violent manner. But masculinity, toxic masculinity and masculinity are one and the same.
Hmm.
So the thing, so to me, it's yes, I do believe that it can exist in the sense that somebody could be overly trying to be masculine, but I do not believe that toxic masculinity in and of itself, like our more toxic side, I don't think that's an issue. Like I could talk about how I'm the fucking I could talk to somebody and tell them like, how they need to fucking get off, they need to start fucking eating meat, vegan food. I could say that, I walk into the kitchen and vegan bitches make me them vegan sandwiches.
Mm.
Like I could be inflammatory. I could say shit. I could be toxic, but I have control over that side.
Uh-huh.
So I mean like I guess what I'm trying to get to is a big part of it is also it's control and ethics and upbringing. So you could blame it on masculinity, but it will always exist to some extent.
Okay. A very quick question then. So let's say someone comes to you and says that toxic masculinity is more about because society expects you to be very macho and bravado about your feelings, that you're never able to actually share with close friends what your feelings are, so you keep your feelings bottled up, and this creates much anger and angst. That would be an example of toxic masculinity. What are your thoughts on that?
I have a number of thoughts. So like I said, it's just kind of it's going back to what I was saying, trying too hard to be masculine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is an issue. So overcompensating. So when it comes to people who bottle up their emotions, like I don't really take them philosophically seriously in the sense that I don't even see that as being masculine in my own definition. If you're not strong enough to deal with your own problems,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like there's maybe certain circumstances where if you're in war and you quickly have to, like I get that, but hmm. I mean, like the expectations in of itself. The problem I have with that is society will always have expectations. So you might try and get rid of the expectations for men to be masculine, but new expectations will rise. So if men, let's say, feel insecure about the fact that they like video games or they like going to the gym, then you're just going to create a new form of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's one of my problem with these expectations is it's very difficult to not only get them to be something that's going to be better over time, but on top of that, create there will always be some level of expectation. So there will always be some level of insecurity. Therefore, there will always be some level of angst.
Right. There could be better,
So
real quick, there could be better expectations than others, right? So an expectation to be macho and bravado and bottle up your feelings is categorically worse than an expectation to be able to have conversations with your friends about your feelings, right?
yeah, so this is kind of like where I take it. I go down the virtue ethics of philosophy. Like I go down the virtue ethics route. I don't believe bottling up your emotions in of itself makes you strong. I think it's actually quite the opposite a lot of times. So I define strength as, physical strength, mental strength, controlling your thought process, controlling your words, your thoughts, ideas. Emotional strength is not only having toughness and tenderness, but it's also emotional strength is being able to, and toughness is a big part of mental, but it's being able to actually accept the fact that you're weak, to be able to develop self-love and self-care, and over time developing confidence with that and dealing with your problems. It's first trying to develop that self-love, self-belief, self-care, confidence.
Hmm.
So, when it comes down to it, I mean, like if you look at Caesar Milan, like I see Caesar Milan as the alpha male. You know, he's the one that goes in and he does things that a 6'4" bodybuilder would be terrified to do. A 6'4" bodybuilder would be terrified to go in the backyard with a German Shepherd who's going to try and maul them to death. But he has emotional mastery of himself. He doesn't allow that emotion to get to him. he remains calm and confident. So, I mean, like, it depends on your perspective of masculinity. Like, if you believe it, bottling up your emotions makes you masculine, then yeah, that's pretty fucking toxic. But
Hmm.
personally, I don't believe in that. And I don't believe that we really look towards people like that to I don't believe when we're given a man who's a leader who has emotional mastery. I don't believe we look up to the person who bottles up his emotions. And if you are that person, then I'm gonna have to say that you are. I think you are very foolish.
That's interesting. And there's really a lot of topics that I
But I
actually
would,
wanted.
I
Yeah, go
would
for it.
like to I would like to also expand on that. So, like, if you're in war, there's advantages to trying to force yourself to bottle up these emotions. Like, you might not have time to emotionally work through everything at once. You might have to just keep going forward. You might have to have that toughness,
Hmm.
and that toughness to be able to power through can also be useful. So, even though, yeah, it might actually harm some people, there's also people such as myself where my ability to push through at times helps me. Like, I suffer from anxiety in the real world. So when I have a panic attack, um, I'm able not only to toughen through it, but I'm also able to be tender. I'm also able to admit how weak I am. I'm also able to love myself and care about myself and have confidence and belief.
Hmm.
So, and even before I had self love, confidence, and belief, I was able to toughen through it. And being able to toughen through it made it easier for me. So you might be able to look at the negatives that toughening through problems like it can provide, but there's also positives. So I try to help people empower themselves to be themselves while at the same time being able to find their own balance. And I empower the individual to decide for himself on who he wants to be, although I encourage people to have a more positive sense of masculinity.
Hmm. I
But
think, yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I don't mean to keep interrupting you.
I see masculinity as amoral and apolitical.
Hmm.
Because quite often when we talk about it, we say be a good man. Like, I follow off of Jack Donovan's philosophy. Like, a lot of this philosophy comes from Jack Donovan. I just have a few critiques of his philosophy from at least the interviews. I never read his books. I just listened to his interviews, and there, like, he's actually had long, like, 2 hour speeches, and like, for example, a more complete beast. So his information isn't just a matter of him trying to monetize it. He's trying to push what he believes, and it's out there. So that's what that's what I go to.
Hmm. That's interesting, and I think that you worded it perfectly there, where this whole notion of masculinity is amoral. There's no reason why you ought to be masculine if we're bringing in David Hume's is-ought conjecture. And so the assumption for me would be that the reason why because your general claim is that people's lives would be better if you followed these rules, right? Men's lives would be
No,
better. Really?
my claim is people who wish to be masculine. So I've thought a lot about this, and this comes down to, like, we rip out gender. This is the hunter mindset. Like, all these virtues comes back to, like, being a hunter.
Hmm.
So it's those who wish to pursue this mindset is those who I wish to empower. And like, I, to some extent, I had it a little bit forced into me, but I am happy now that I had it forced into me.
Hmm.
So there are certain individuals that I personally feel like they have a negative idea of masculinity. And I think the individuals that have a perspective of masculinity being something that's unrealistic that they can't live up to, I think they ought to consider my belief system. However, for men who do not wish to be masculine, such as gay men that just they're certain gay flamboyant men that are more feminine, that want to, maybe be called a girl or something. I would not advocate that we ought to change them.
Hmm. Why do you think people ought to consider this sort of viewpoint, though?
Because people like myself have been taught a very disempowering idea of masculinity. That
Hmm.
it's this is illusion of NASCARs, it's this illusion of consumerism, this illusion of emotional suppression, this illusion of being fragile on the inside. It's this illusion of the mistakes of our forefathers. It's the illusion of the mistakes that we were imprinted on. And when I mean mistakes, I mean it's an illusion of a behavior that does not serve a utility.
Hmm.
Like, for example, if 90% of women in my life are complete fucking, completely crazy, I'm not going to say that femininity in of itself is about being completely, crazy, because that doesn't serve utility. Their behavior in and of itself did not necessarily serve utility.
Hmm.
So I guess when I'm talking about masculinity, I think the people that ought to reconsider and potentially follow it are people who have been living a cultural lie.
It's okay, but if you're saying it's not a moral claim, right?
No, I'm saying it's very subjective to the individual. That's why I brought up the golden mean of gender. I personally think people need to find a balance for themselves.
Okay.
I don't think I can prescribe a one fits all solution for everybody. And also, nor do I wish to.
Hmm. Do you think, generally speaking, though, if most people were to abide by these sets of rules, would their lives, generally speaking, be better? So obviously, there's going to be exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, most people's lives would be better off because we've been evolutionarily programmed to be masculine. This is sort of a byproduct of millions of years of evolution.
Um, I think for the majority of people, I think they would be better off. Yeah, I think
Okay.
for the majority of men, but honestly, I'm not even sure if I really give a shit. I care about empowering people that wish to pursue it.
Uh-huh. Okay. So, I mean, by that standard, then wouldn't you be able to say that people would, generally speaking, would be better off, and that's why you'd be advocating it?
Yeah, but honestly, that's not why I'm advocating. I'm advocating because of the alternatives are terrible.
Mm. What would be the alternatives? A quick few examples.
I'm Stefan Molyneux from Freedom Main Radio. Today, we're going to talk about the philosophy of it and how it's anti-white, even though it was written in the 1970s.
Oh no.
And if
Are
and
you gonna tell me to get married and have kids? Hurry up.
I'll also keep in mind, if you're left wing, you're a cuck libtard. And in a few months, I'm going to upload a video about how I was chased around by Antifa and how I had to run away, and how I'm the victim, even though I was a pussy and I ran away.
Hmm.
Um, Also, I advocate for defooing your family. Like, this is all being very inflammatory, but this is the reality of what people might run into, or Coach Red Pill's ideas.
Hmm.
This very binary, very very restrictive way of thinking. And one of the problems I have with it is, philosophically, I don't see the given value that it truly has to empower the individual to truly make themselves strong, to truly make themselves a man amongst men.
Mm.
Like, if people emulated Stefan Molyneux's behavior, trying to be quote unquote alpha, like Faraday Speaks, he's a bread tube YouTuber who used to be alt right, and he found the alt right rabbit hole because he was looking for self help development material, and he found Stefan Molyneux. Like, if people emulate his behavior and his characteristics, they'll end up with a victim complex, while at the same time complaining about the left having the victim complex. So I care about trying to provide an alternative that would empower people that wish to pursue a hunter mindset or a more masculine mindset.
Okay. And so jumping over to a similar topic, because I think one of the instances in life that sort of brings down almost everybody's masculinity is heartbreak. And you've talked about this in one of your videos, She Cannot Help You. So, what are your thoughts on how best to get over a heartbreak in a masculine way?
I'm going to upload a video in the future. It's called Masculinity is Forged. And I like that word because I remember Jack Donovan said, and, Bulldog Mind said, I don't agree with this. So femininity is born, masculinity is forged. Femininity has its own social hierarchies. It's not as, like, the standards of going to war, it's not as difficult. Like, the challenges that men had to face, going to war, the hunters have to face, is definitely more difficult. But the thing is when it comes to heartbreak, I think a big aspect towards actual progress is, first off, understanding that you will be broken down and accepting the fact that you will be broken down. Knowing it's going to happen, accepting it is the first thing. Number two is it's a matter of being constructive to yourself and actually learning how to criticize yourself and being open to criticism. And then number three is doing what you can to try and deconstruct your negative behaviors and construct positive ones. And it's then if anything, I'd say number four is obviously having the right places to look
Hmm.
for information. So I just said four things, and I'm pretty tired. I'm not sure if I'm going to remember it all. But when I say fat masculinity is forged, what I'm trying to get to is like you're going to be broken down like iron. You're going to be melted down. It's going to be miserable. It's going to be painful. It's going to be a fucking tragedy. But through that, you're going to form a fucking steel will, and you're
Hmm.
going to rise again like the phoenix from the ashes. And that's empowering. Suffering hurts. Like suffering really fucking hurts. But honestly, now that I've gone through so much suffering, like I've gone through in my life, I've been sexually assaulted. I've felt hatred towards. I was taught to hate men when I was a kid by my very sexist feminist mother, and then as I got older, in my teenage years, I hated women, and then as I became an adult, I let go of that hate. When and in the mid 2010s, like 2015, 2014, 2016, I felt prejudice, racial prejudice, because of constant tensions I was around, and I let go of that. Like all these, like everything terrible that I've gone through in my life, the abuse, the bullying, the loneliness, it created character that is, and not only character but perseverance and resilience and mental stability. Like I can mentally hold myself in very uncomfortable situations that maybe someone else couldn't.
Hmm. So
So
the
it's understanding that you can get to that point, but that's only going to happen over a matter of time. So I know I'm really this sounds really anecdotal and very pointless here, but this isn't just me. Anybody can get to where I was at
hmm
if they're willing to go through a process like that, or maybe just about anybody. But yeah, I guess my point is you will be breaking down. You will be broken down. It's a matter of it's kind of like what Rocky says. It's not a matter of how many times you get hit. It's a matter about how many times you get back up. And you got to be constructive, and you got to accept the fact that you're going to be destroyed, and you got to accept the fact that you're going to have to learn, and you're going to have good information to learn from.
so this is a mode of being that we have to work towards. It's not just going to come about for by the sake of being a man, right? You have to work towards it. You have to forge this sense of masculinity. But you said, uh, how do you know that it is not completely anecdotal? Like, whenever you make your videos, do you sort of back it up with general statistics from evolutionary psychology or general psychology like that?
Honestly, from time to time, but honestly, I do read Psychology Today from time to time, but how do I know this is not just big part of it is my anecdotal experience, but also a big part of it too is I guess my experience talking to other men, and but more importantly, it's also the fact that I read about different cultures in in the mid 2010s. I read about different cultures in Europe, like across different cultures, masculinity as a whole is I'm going to deal with masculinity as a whole, like ideas of race cars, ideas of stoicism. All these ideas of what we believe to be masculine is perceived. So I guess what I'm trying to say is across different cultures, a lot of things are different. And personally, this is what I believe is to be the same. And it correlates not only with my own experiences, but what I've read about different cultures across Europe and some of the Middle East, and more importantly, to me, it also makes rational sense when I think about what does a hunter require. And I think masculinity ultimately comes down to how we perceive a hunter.
Hmm.
And like I'm a vegan, but people will still desire that mindset, so long as people wish to protect the people they care about, their land, their property, their friends, their family. People are inevitably always going to desire that mindset.
Hmm.
And when I rationally think about it as well, it makes rational sense. And when I try to criticize my ideas, like, can you name a society where a cowardly, weak man is seen as masculine, or an unhonorable man who is incompetent? He's seen as masculine. Like I don't think there's any cultures that have that. And the only times where honor becomes less valuable is when money becomes more valuable. But even then, the moment you take away money, you have to be able to be respected amongst your fellow men in order for fellow men to listen to you or follow you, or for you to be able to be accepted by them.
Hmm.
So I to me it makes rational sense. And from all the empirical evidence I've seen from, and also from my own experience, everything just seems to make sense so far.
Right.
So I'm not all knowing, but yeah.
And this goes back to the original claim that the reason why these values are viewed in a positive light is because they were evolutionarily beneficial for men, right, in the history of our Genesis. And
Yeah,
yeah, How does the topic of tribalism fit into this? Because tribalism is something that we also were sort of evolved into thinking. Like it's a set of mind that the people who are closer to us, who look uh, more to us than the others, who are closer to us than farther away from us, those are the people that are going to take precedent, especially if they're in our family tree. So how does tribalism play into this whole idea of masculinity? Is tribalism, generally speaking, a bad thing or a good thing?
I just wanted to say this before we continue. In some cultures, I forgot to say this, being stoic is seen as being emotionless and it's seen as being weak. In
Hmm.
some cultures, being forward with your emotions is seen as being strong. It's seen as being aggressive. So, like, strength is very well perceived. I forgot to say that. I thought that was interesting. It's
Mm,
like a difference between cultures and how different cultures perceive different things.
okay.
But when it comes to tribalism, this is why I want to make my channels. I want to try and emphasize the fact that we can have tribalism without racism. And for example, you can have a tribe of your family or friends. You can have it based on your religion, whatever you want. Now, I'm very close. Like I no longer consider myself anti-theist, but I'm very fucking close to it. And I agree with anti-theism on many different subjects. But it's just how do I say this nicely? I want to try and encourage people to pursue a more constructive tribalism for their society versus destructive tribalism. Like I see racism as sort of this tribalistic means of the past that no longer serves a unification purpose in the modern day and age. Like masculinity, all these concepts philosophically, like if they truly wish to stand the test of time, they have to provide utility for people. Stoicism provides utility through allowing yourself to be able to experience stoicism and cynicism from Diogenes and from Marcus Aurelius. It allows us to be able to experience happiness and peace with the world and how terrible things are. You know, if masculinity wishes to exist, it needs to serve a purpose for the people. I don't see racism as serving a modern purpose. Modern infighting in your own nation, tribe, community, I don't see that as serving a purpose. So, and there's lots of different other negative, or should I say, destructive tribalism. A great example of this would be the worst sections of the incel community.
Hmm.
It doesn't really serve to help the individual or build the individual. It's just amongst the worst sections of the incel community. It's sort of just this very negative, black pilled, wallowing in their guilt and wallowing in their sorrow. With the worst sections of MGTOW, it's kind of the same thing. Now, MGTOW on average and incels on average, I actually get along with them. I don't mind them on average. But there's the worst sections of them where, yeah, they behave kind of cultish. And you have the same thing with real world gangs, where I think it's a destructive tribalism. I don't think it serves the community. And the only, like, yeah, it serves to give people wealth that, you know, perhaps would have died on the streets, but at the exchange of destroying society as a whole. And even then, sometimes, you know, sometimes even then, gangs are just pursued for status, not even necessarily because they have to, or you know, because of other negative aspects of the culture, such as people feeling really angry and wanting to feel respected.
Hmm.
You know, and it's you know, and same thing with the alt right and racism. I don't think it's a constructive tribalism. So I'm not sure. Does that answer your question or?
Yeah, so it seems to me that there is good tribalism and there's bad tribalism. So bad tribalism is, as you've mentioned, stuff like racism. I would even put religion into that category, whereas good tribalism would be sort of familial aspects. So preferring your
Like,
parents over strangers, stuff like that.
so, like, I personally, okay, just for record, I fucking hate religion. I'm pretty anti-theist, and I'll probably make videos in the future criticizing religion. But I actually see religion now as neutral because people need community.
Hmm.
So remember when you talked with Jay Shapiro and he said how people left when people don't leave that house with the community, when they don't get outside that house, when there's a house with written rules and you're not allowed to dispute them from somebody who you've never met before, but it's being claimed that that individual is real. When somebody escapes that house, they're free, and Jay Shapiro feels bad for people who don't. Like you remember him saying that?
Yeah, I remember.
This is my perspective on it, is that this will always exist. Like religion will never go away unless we create an alternative.
Hmm.
And I'm trying to give people content to maybe help them figure out alternatives to maybe the worst types of cults. And even though they're going to be religious, I hope they can at least go to a religion that's not like a Scientology or something.
Hmm.
So I try to play like non-biased here and there, but I would say religion overall it's more destructive than constructive. But the problem is in a society where people need community, and if that's the only place they're gonna fucking get it, then I can't fucking blame them for going to it.
Uh-huh.
I fucking hate religion. Don't get me wrong. It's just I acknowledge now that they fucking people need this shit.
Uh,
People need community, and I think a greater solution would be funding community centers and actually replacing the purpose that religion holds. Because I find a lot of anti-theists, rather than admitting that religion actually does serve a purpose and trying to replace it, they'll try to deny it, then try to criticize it on the internet. I think we need to acknowledge that it serves a purpose and then fucking replace it.
mhm. I agree for the most part. So here would be my counter to that. I think the only country in which that would probably take place in would be the United States, because the United States is the only first world country that is predominantly religious. When I was having this conversation with Jay Shapiro, I sort of mentioned the fact that other countries. Oh, it wasn't with Jay Shapiro actually. I mentioned this when I was having a conversation with Colin Wright, that whenever you look at other countries and you document the downfall of religiosity and the increase in irreligiosity, you generally see positive outcomes in just about every metric that you can imagine. So this is even economic, GDP, even social cohesion. And when meta-analysis of these studies have been conducted, there does seem to be a correlation between the drop in religion and religiosity and the increase in the positive aspects of these metrics. Now,
Yeah.
Jay Shapiro said that, or no, not Jay Shapiro, sorry, Colin Wright said yes, but these are first world countries, and I agree. So I think what you say applies to the United States, which is the only first world country that is predominantly religious, and third world countries. But I think the end goal of society would be to get to that first world country status to the point where religion is no longer necessary. And so when you said that these people really just need these communal practices, well, when you look at Pew and Gallup polls of asking people in other first world countries aside from the United States, what do you look for meaning in? Almost no one answers religion. It's usually family, friends, personal goals. So it seems like other first world countries, yours including Canada, have already figured this out. It's just the United States that is lagging behind, and I don't really know the answer to why that is. I think mainly it has to do with the sort of religious roots that the United States has had, whereas other countries haven't. But that would be my main point of contention. What do you think about that?
No, I agree. I would rather replace religion. It's
Hmm.
just my problem is for the individual. Like that's for the collective as a whole, definitely fucking better. But as for the individual, somebody who needs somebody right there, right then,
Hmm.
it is what it is. And but another way to put it is like if you look at guys like if you look at all these people that are getting quote unquote god pilled on the internet, or if you look at the new right, whatever you want to call it, if you've ever had a conversation with people that are generally converted back into religion, one of the biggest issues that they have, and I felt this personally myself, is they felt as if they felt as if they left religion and their life had no meaning, they had no community, and if they had no money, they couldn't do anything. Like if you want community in today's modern capital society, you need to go to the bar, you need to go swimming, you need capital, you need resources. And religion has a power that we are definitely undervaluing as a society. It's a value of voluntarily or trying to serve other people without profit. And don't get me wrong, the government does this to some extent. I just think it should be expanded, and I'm talking about the individual.
Hmm. That's
Like, do you
interesting.
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, the individual. What my counter to that would be that a lot of the times with these sort, so for instance, the person that you mentioned, when he left religion, he sort of lost meaning. I think a big chunk of that would be the fact that when you grow up religious, you're effectively told that where you're going to get your meaning is from your religion. So I was raised Catholic, for instance, and I was told that, I should love God more than I love my family, that this is ultimately my end goal in life. And so when people lose that, when they lose their faith in that, I think, well, of course they're going to feel like they lost meaning because they grew up and being told that that's where they're supposed to get their meaning from. And so I would always say, like, well, that's the thing that we need to get rid of. We need to stop telling young children, indoctrinating them into thinking that where they're going to get their religion from is their God.
You have to keep like I said, I do lean more even though I do see religion as a neutral, I do lean more towards I believe it's negative and it should be eventually replaced. It's just once again, all this doesn't this doesn't take away from the fact that it's easy to feel very isolated in today's modern
Hmm.
society, and religion can alleviate that without capital. In fact, you could be homeless and people can invite you into the church.
Yeah. No, I agree, but like
Now,
you could say the
now,
same thing
now,
about
hold
like
on, hold on,
cocaine.
hold on. You don't get me wrong. Like, I don't like religion. I think it should be replaced as a whole. But how do I say this nicely? It doesn't change the fact that I personally think that it has the capacity to reemerge unless we recognize that.
Hmm.
It serves a purpose, and I think it should be replaced.
Okay. It sounds a lot like you're still an anti-theist. I mean, you can be an anti-theist and recognize the good things of religion, but
I'm
still.
not. Yeah, but when I take that neutral stance, I'm not sure if I am.
Mm, okay, that's interesting.
It's it's just like I said, it's like I agree with what you said. Like the problem is you have this idea. It's very reactionary. You have this idea that your idea that God is good and everything is hunky dory, and Sky Daddy's looking down and he's looking after you. And then when you come to a realization that there's no evidence for this, and even if there is a Sky Daddy, you don't know if there's a million Sky Daddies. You don't know if he's omnipotent. You don't know if he's omniscient. You don't know if he's omnibenevolent. You don't know anything about him. But you also know that everyone else has a different idea of what God is, and we're fighting over it to create a sense of comfort and well-being for us, with no proof that we're creating well-being for this God. When you come to these realizations, a lot of people quite often end up leaving religion, and my problem is with my problem is with all of it is we just need to recognize the problem to kind of to be able to cure the problem as a whole.
Hmm.
I mean, like, right now we live in a day and age where Christianity is in a golden age and Islam is in the dark ages. I think in 1,000 years from now, if things become more destabilized and if different ideas are championed, one day we could live in a religious hellhole, and a religious state could always reemerge. Like, this is also the other issue I have with religion, why I don't like it, is there's a possibility of religious states reemerging. And religion it's always an uphill fight against religion for secularism. Like, acknowledging evolution, um, getting religion out of government. Religion tends to almost seep its way in and try and control things,
Hmm.
whether this be Islam, Christianity. And Christianity does it to a much later extent, and Islam right now does it to a much greater extent.
Hmm.
But it's like I said, I think we need to solve the problem for the individuals on the ground first. And when it comes to measuring happiness, there's a problem I have with this, is how do we measure happiness? Like, if people are committing suicide en masse, and if we have a happier group, does that mean people are happier? Like, happiness is kind of relative. Like, you could technically look at married Christian families, and you could say they're happier on average in comparison to liberal families, or you could say Christian families on average are happier. I've heard studies about that shit. But even then, that doesn't include all the people that were brought up in religion, who left religion, who are now depressed.
Hmm.
Like, it's the problem is with, like, usually data towards happiness is it's very inflammatory, in the sense that, like, it depends on not only how you're measuring it. I mean, like, Jesus and Christ, a lot I hear quite often that the Nordic countries are super happy. They barely get any sun up there, and you talk to most people that I've talked to on Discord, or just in general, or even read about it online, a lot of people do claim to feel depressed because of lack of sun. So I mean, like, this is all very, how do I say? It's all very it's difficult to measure happiness, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we measure, and how are you measuring it?
Hmm.
So it's like, um it's not just a matter of well-being, quote unquote, I'm measuring. It's a matter of alleviating. You could say this is well-being. I don't see this as collective well-being, but I do see as individually alleviating some level of suffering. And that's what religion tends to do for some individuals that get reconverted back. And I don't think it will die off ever at this point. I think it'll slowly decrease, but I don't think it'll die off. And I think at some point it'll actually have a reemergence.
Really?
Yes,
Huh.
I don't think it'll die off, honestly. I think it'll get to a point where, sorry, let me rephrase that. If we cannot recognize as a society that we cannot just have societies based off of consumerism. Our main culture can't just be consumerism. There does need to be some level of um of community based events or something. to replace what we once had for religion. I think eventually over time, even if we hit a point where, let's say, 10% of people are religious, I think at some point it'll eventually just reemerge, not as strong as before, but I think it'll fluctuate sort
Hmm.
of.
That's interesting. Okay, I'd actually probably disagree with that. I do think that sort of the curve of intelligentsia is asympt asymptotic in the sense that at a point it's just going to become so abundantly clear that religion is false that even though people want it to be true, they just can't do it. So for instance, I do think that eventually Christianity and Islam, and I will concede your point that there have been emergencies in the past. There was an emergence of Islam, for instance, in Iran. There was an emergence in Turkey. So so it could happen in the future, but we also need to be careful of the genetic fallacy, where we interpret future events based on the past. But I do think, generally speaking, that it's very likely that Islam, Christianity, Judaism will see that in the same way as we currently see the Greek religions or Norse mythology, as you mentioned. Um, and I would use the data that I would use to back up this claim would just really be all the first world countries that are becoming effectively more or less and less religious, even the United States, where, just a few years ago, 50% of the Americans would never vote for an atheist. Now that's much, much lower.
Give it 100, 200, 300 years, man.
If we live
I'm talking
that way,
long.
that long.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just saying, give it a really long term period of time. I'm not saying this will happen anytime soon, but I'm saying this
Hmm.
is a I'm saying this is a possibility that I think might happen. Even if it fluctuates down to like fucking 1%, I think it could fluctuate back up to 20 or 25%.
Hmm.
It's just the thing is we have emotional needs and we have tribal needs, and people can manipulate that. And through media, especially with the power of the internet, anyone can set out their message. I don't actually watch Competing Forever anymore, but I heard he went full JQ, like Jewish Question. I'm not sure if he did or didn't, but I mean, anybody can get out their message, Stefan Molyneux or Competing Forever, or anyone can champion religion.
Hmm.
And if they're able to sound convincing enough, people could end up rejoining it. So rather than take this possibility of it just potentially dying off in the long run, I think as a society we should replace religion with community centers or funding different events through communities that would allow people to assimilate and integrate. I think this would also help with immigration as well. This would also help with de-radicalization of terrorists, because if people had a sense of community amongst different ethnic groups and different people, I think there would be a lot less people that could be poached into joining the alt right or ISIS or any form of supremacy, like radical supremacy.
Hmm. Yeah, on that I completely agree with you. Have you ever read the works of Jonathan Haidt?
No, I don't. I listen to audiobooks generally.
Oh,
I
you
don't
know,
read a whole lot.
oh, he's great. Oh man, you're pissing me off right now if you don't read. If you're watching the video portion of this, you can see that behind me is a giant bookshelf.
Well,
Um,
I do read from time to time. It's just Corona money.
gotcha.
Now's
No
a good
worries.
time to like. Now's a good time just at this point in my life to go to YouTube and hit
Hmm.
up an audiobook.
Honestly, I'm seeing the value in books less and less because I'll spend hours upon hours reading a book, and I only remember the information that I could have easily gotten from like a 10-minute video. So I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking reading this many books is just pointless.
That's where I disagree. Is books also give you more details, and the details that you choose to remember might have been left out in that summary. Not
Hmm.
only that, but also the other advantages to reading a book is obviously practicing linguistic skills. But another advantage is because you've read so much, you're more likely to condense. You're more likely to not forget the fact that you read that book because you spent so much time reading it.
Hmm.
Now that could obviously, that could be true, it could be false, but for me, personally, when I read a book, I personally feel as if I nitpick the most important things that I would have not gotten from like a 15-minute summary.
Hmm.
What my mind, my heart chooses to remember. Anyways, But I think you understand my stance on cults and religion, right? Like we can't just be on YouTube saying like doing response videos and saying whatever needs to be said to debunk quote unquote bad religious ideas. At some point, does need to be actual real world advocacy.
Yeah.
And more and more I think about it, the more and more I realize it's like it's a logical solution for an emotional problem. The when people are forced to join religion from their childhood, that's a logical problem. When people join it because of emotional issues or lack of funds, that's no longer just a logical issue. That's an emotional issue. That's a economic issue.
Hmm.
So this is where real world advocacy actually is way more important.
Hmm.
And I think as religion dies off, it's going to become a greater and greater X factor for religion for their new converts.
Okay, and we can probably jump onto the topic of veganism here. So, this is something that I've been finding it increasingly more and more difficult to justify eating meat. So I want to get your take on two things. First, veganism as a health prospect. Is it healthier? Does that fit into your whole ideal of masculinity? And two, veganism as an ethical claim, that it's unethical to eat slaughtered animals. What are your thoughts?
So when it comes to health, like the World Health, so actually, how about I grab some? I actually have an archive, and I do have like I archive information. Could you give me a sec?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just hold on. Like, if you've ever seen Vegan Gains, he goes into more details about it and actually talking about the actual chemicals that are problems. But when it comes down to like let's talk about the nutrition. B12 actually comes from it comes from it's a bacteria found in soil that you get from water, your food, your meat. Everything would have B12 because everything drinks and eats from the earth. However, because of chlorine, we sort of got rid of that, and like the World Health Organization listed red meats as a probable level 2 carcinogen, where processed meats is a level 1 carcinogen. So, like when it comes down to health, I personally think being vegan is definitely just as healthy, if not more. Even though you can be healthy on a omnivore diet, omnivore diet, you can be healthy on an omnivore diet, and you can be healthy on a vegan. You can be unhealthy, sorry, on a vegan diet. But overall, I do believe all the modern science is pointing towards it being. I'm not a scientist, and I'm not specialized in this. I do believe it's pointing towards being just as healthy, if not healthier. There's been a few studies where I believe like they took like I think on average vegans have higher testosterone compared to omnivores. The thing is yeah, because I believe on average like omnivores are statistically more likely to develop cancer
Hmm.
than vegans are, and it's like I could probably talk a little bit about that, but I'm not really a scientist. So when it comes to health, yeah, I do think it's better for you physically, and I think if you want to be a healthy, strong man, healthy, strong man, you should choose a superior diet. Number one, number two, when it comes down to like ethics, that's really where I can talk a lot more about. When it comes down to like the philosophy of like veganism, I can talk more about that. When it comes to environmentalism, I could also talk about that. Like it takes about approximately like about almost around 2,000 gallons of water to make a cow. So like 1,800, 1,600 to make a full grown cow. To make a pig, it's like 300, 300 gallons, 400 gallons. We genetically modify these animals to make more food for us, even though it sometimes makes their bodies painfully uncomfortable with chronic pain, like chickens not being able to walk. Um, we pump them full of antibiotics that creates antibiotic resistance. And most animals are fed, B12 supplements, and sometimes even grass-fed animals are fed B12 supplements. So a lot of people sort of get this idea that eating animals you're going to get all your B12. You better be eating a lot of fucking animals. And even if you eat that much animals, it's probably not that good for you. Like the best source of B12 is a fucking supplement. So like when it comes down to nutrition, man, I think there's a lot to be said, but like the environmental aspect, it's just like fucking water is it's a powerful, important resource. Like we feed billions of animals each year. Like there's a lot of socialists I talk to online. And I'm not a socialist, but we feed billions of fucking animals each year. Like 20 billion, 50 billion, 75 billion, I don't know, billions in animals. And then we also slaughter animals in the ocean. We feed billions of animals each year, but yet we can't feed that many human beings. We can't even feed 10 million, 9 million, sorry, 9 billion, 10 billion human beings. And most of this meat is going towards the first world economy. So it doesn't matter really how you plan out your economy, whether you're a socialist, a capitalist, or a communist. Like, it doesn't matter what economic system, even if you figure out a system that's better than the one that we have today. Eating meat is economically inefficient. And like I think like 40 around 30 to 40% of crops go towards oil and oil and animals. Approximately 10 to 15% goes towards humans, or 8%. Like, it's a very inefficient conversion rate,
Hmm.
because you're feeding these products to these animals to eat the crops.
What would
They convert that into energy, and they poop out a lot of it. So yeah, I think it's inefficient that way. And then would you mind if I talk about the ethics, or do you have something?
Oh no, please do talk about the ethics.
Oh yeah, I also forgot to say it destroys the ocean too. We kill lots of animals in the ocean. We round them all up. Also, I forgot to say a lot of these animals live in their own shit, uh, which is kind of nasty. Even like farming salmon. But like so wait, what am I talking about? Ethics?
Yeah, ethics.
So like ethical, like you could go down, ask yourselves, name the trait. I actually don't rely on that. In fact, I actually have my own way of framing why I think it's unethical to eat animals. And from time to time, I might use name the trait. Have you ever heard ask yourself use that?
Yeah, I have.
Did you like it or hate it?
I actually like it. I think it's a good way of determining or of getting people's consciousness to be raised about why it is that they're not choosing to value the lives of animals rather than other aside from humans.
So when it comes to like veganism, yeah, I mean, like there's for the ethic reasons, like if you want to eat ground beef, well, there's ground beef alternatives. If you want to eat chicken, there's chicken alternatives. If you want to eat ice cream, I have vegan ice cream at my house. And a lot of vegan ice cream tastes good, by the way. Um, so there's lots of alternatives for each of these products, but the reason why we're eating these products is it's essentially is because we've been marketed that this is good for us. Like once upon a time, we used farming to stay alive, but now it's different. Things have changed. The reason why we have so much cheese, so much dairy, so much meat products, like go into your next time you go into your grocery market, just ask yourself if this isn't ethical, if this isn't good for our health, if this isn't sorry, if this is just as good, if not worse, or sorry, yeah, if this is just as good, if not worse than a vegan diet, why is this here? And a big part of it's marketing. We're marketed that this is good for us. Um, like I believe, what was it? I can't remember. It was like Sigmund Freud's cousin. I can't remember what the fuck his name was, but I think there was one guy who lobbied a bunch of doctors in the United States to advocate for. I could be wrong about this. I believe he advocated for doctors to approve of the fact of a study that eating bacon in the morning was good for you in comparison to eating oatmeal. Like a large portion of why we eat meat and dairy is because of mass marketing, and it sort of convinced us. Like I think name the trait helps with hypothetical intellectual consistency. I reach more towards when I talk about veganism, I more so try to tackle apathy. So my argumentation works differently. And would you like to hear some of them?
I'd love to.
Okay, can you let me take out my notes? I actually have notes in the real world.
Yeah, go for
I'm
it.
just gonna go pull that. So yeah, name the trait works for certain people. My argumentation works for certain people. It's not going to work for everybody. Um, reaching out to them, kind of getting them to come to the error of their ways, quote unquote. But let me just pull up this information. Because the thing is like when I was a kid, I was sexually assaulted, I was beaten up, I was bullied, and I went crazy. And when I went vegan, I was talking to a guy named Nick, and he was telling me about how like what he was telling me about how like I'm going to try to make this as short and simple as possible. He worked at a lab where they used to test cures for AIDS on monkeys, and sometimes the monkeys would commit suicide. One monkey committed suicide. They brought him back to life just to chop off his head, so they didn't have to report that the monkey committed suicide.
Jesus Christ. How did the monkey commit suicide?
Oh, tore out his own, tore out his neck.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's But when I asked him if like the monkeys they probably hate people when you go in there, he's like what Nick told me, Nick Lyston, was no, the monkeys don't. In fact, actually, quite often they would reach out to me, and that reached to my heart more than anything because like a scared animal is probably going to kill you to save itself.
Mm.
A scared animal isn't that honorable, but like the fact that it wanted nothing but love and it was denied that, that's heartbreaking. It had no malicious intent. It had no selfish, harmful intent. But and then I met someone else named Guac who was very sincere, and then someone else named Dantes who showed me Dominion and Earthling. When I saw pigs eat each other, you know, when I was younger, I used to be insane. I used to want to fucking kill people and eat them. Like I was fucking crazy. Like going through that type of traumatization drives you fucking crazy. So when I saw the pigs eating each other, I didn't realize that at first, but over time I realized I could relate to the pigs and what they had to go through. And because I could relate to what they had to go through, it allowed me to it sort of allowed me to not only connect to them but also um, understand what they've gone through, but also allows me to sort of speak on their behalf of that state of insanity. I'm not saying pigs feel insanity in the exact same way humans do, but if I had to take a guess, I would say it's probably something similar.
Mm-hmm.
So all the traumas I've gone through, like I sort of try to talk about that, like apathy and why we shouldn't be apathetic. So like I go down a few hypotheticals. Would you like to hear some of them? And I sort of talk about that. I try to also talk and argue the person and his perspective and try to work against his own argumentation. That is one strategy. Sometimes I talk about health. Sometimes I talk about environment. Sometimes I talk about ethics. Sometimes I talk about viruses, like the coronavirus. Like the coronavirus wouldn't exist in a vegan world. And the
Mm-hmm.
more we eat meat, we're just going to have more and more of these pandemics happening throughout the world.
100%.
So the less we eat meat, you know, the less of this fucking shit happens. So, right. Like, have you? Okay, so I'm sure you've probably heard of Leonardo da Vinci, right?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so I haven't actually like read a whole lot. Although what I've read about him from Wikipedia and other sources, I heard that he was a vegetarian or a vegan at his time, and
Mm-hmm.
he was an actual animal advocate, and he believed in challenging human superiority. I think he died in year 1520 or 19 or 1519 or 1520.
Yeah, it was the 16th century.
Yeah, and he died, you know, almost 100 years ago, and he saw this was wrong. I think as society moves forward, like he was so much ahead of his time. I think as society goes forward, we will see the what's happening to the animals as the same thing that happened to the Jews during the Holocaust. And I'm not trying to say that to insult Jewish people. I'm just saying we will see it as the same level of unnecessary barbarism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because when you think about it too, like we're sort of fed this narrative through our society that might makes right, and this is our. We don't need a justification. We just need to be able to overpower these animals.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, it's the alt right uses very similar lines of logic. Like quite often, like some of the same argumentations I use against racists are the same argumentations I use against people who are not vegan.
Mm-hmm.
Is you know, if might makes right, well then you don't need a justification for anything that you do.
Yeah.
Like when you think about it.
So let's.
And when you go down to like race and intelligence as well, like race, I'm sorry, one sec. Race is quite often a big X factor, and so is intelligence. That's the exact same thing that races have been using throughout history. So
Okay.
you
So
want to say something?
yeah, let's try to steel man the opposition though as much as possible. So let's say someone comes up to you and says that, well, we have a sophisticated enough understanding of neuroscience to the point where we can recognize that the capacity of consciousness for chickens, for cows, is nowhere near the same level as the capacity of consciousness for humans. So therefore, they're not suffering in the same way that we're suffering. They're screaming and they're yelling because that's their evolutionary response, but it's in the same frame as an evolutionary response that a virus has. A virus isn't alive, but it's able to adapt to its environment and change its behavior based on its environment. So how would you respond to that sort of argument?
Okay, so do you want me to steel man it more, or do I just argument again? I argue against it now, right?
If you want, you could steelman it even more, but if you otherwise, you could just argue against it.
I guess I could just I guess if I could say something else, I would make the argument that if I was to claim to be somebody who's for eating animals, I'd claim to be that I personally believe that we ought to have a human supremacy. I think it's practical. I think
Mhm.
it's rational. I think it's reasonable. More importantly, I also like if I was to claim to be an omnivore, if I had to steal man, I would try and I'd frame down the person's argument being particularly about the fact that other animals would hypothetically do this to us. And this is no different than what happens throughout all the animal kingdom. And even though it might be cruel, we could technically try to work towards more humane farming. And I understand maybe the vegans' frustrations, but yeah, I would say it's usually something like that.
Uh-huh.
I
Okay.
don't know. Is that a good steel man?
That's a great steel man, yeah.
Okay, so when it comes down to consciousness, my first argument would be it's kind of like name the trait. A disabled, handicapped person could have a much lower level of consciousness, yet we value them. Not only do we value them, but in some ways we value people that are not able to defend themselves or people that are not able to advocate for themselves. Sometimes we value them more just because we appreciate one's life in a civil, safe society. We value compassion very like we value fuck. Let me try to reframe this. It's not uncommon to value somebody who's disabled more because they're disabled, such as like we have benefits for the disabled. We try to take care of them. We care more about taking care of those who can't take care of themselves. That in itself, I think it's a reason why we ought to care for animals. I don't know. Did I frame that nicely?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so when it comes down to humane farming, not only is it more costly, but a lot of people wouldn't be able to afford that to begin with. And if I had to argue against, farming, I'd make an argument that, one of the other issues is government subsidies for milk, for meat. They have an unfair advantage through the European Union, United States, Canada, and it's even if we switched over to grass fed farming, having that amount of land for the amount of people being born is next to impossible. So factory farming is not only efficient, but it's also better with managing waste of the environment. Even if we had grass fed beef roaming around on the soil, they'd be pooping everywhere. And if we had a higher concentration that would normally be found in nature with predators, we would that we would be protecting for our own slaughter. We would also have their own crap leaking out into the ocean, leaking out into rivers and lakes. We'd have the higher. I think they have a higher nitrogen or higher chemical balance. Like there's dead zones in the ocean because of cow shit, basically.
Mhm.
Um, and if I also had to argue against, was it? So we talked about that consciousness. So we mentioned consciousness. We mentioned human's life. We mentioned was it ethics, morality, or environment? I can't fucking remember.
I think that's about it.
I don't know. There's more I had to say, but I would like to go down a specific rabbit hole that I generally go down when I talk about veganism.
Mhm.
So I use a particularly few hypotheticals. Would you and how about I go through these hypotheticals with you?
Yeah.
Okay, so this hypothetical starts. I'm going to just kind of give you and explain what's going on, just because this is kind of just a conversation, this is a debate. This hypothetical is designed to challenge apathy, sociopathy, and psychopathy from my own personal experience from wanting to kill and harm people. And I think this also illustrates the interest that the collective serves the individual that we often generally forget about in our own pleasure and in the pursuit of our own hedonism and pleasure. So, example one is, or before that, hypothetically, what if I gave you a pill and we're going to call this the apathy pill? And this pill will limit your connection to human insentience. So this whole consistency test is I call it the apathy pill. So I give you the apathy pill. You take it, and this apathy pill induces nightmares, where at the end of it all, you will end up becoming a traumatized sociopath or psychopath, and you're gonna be like fucked up for like a month, and then after that month, you're gonna be like, just you're not gonna have a whole lot of empathy. You're gonna have a lot of apathy.
Hmm.
If you took that pill with all your moral framework, your mind, your experiences you've gone through, your belief system, all you didn't have left was your sense of emotional consciousness. If you wanted to kill somebody, or at least a better way to say it is you wouldn't have as much empathy or compassion. If you wanted to kill somebody, would you do it? If you saw him every week, every 2 weeks, would you kill somebody who you wanted to kill?
In this new mode that I'm in,
Yeah.
well, from the perspective of someone who isn't in that mode as of right now, I am acknowledging the values that I currently have, and with the values that I have now, I obviously wouldn't want to. But in the framework of the new values that I would adopt after I take this pill, then in that
This
framework, it really wouldn't matter to me.
Okay, so I'm going to rephrase this. You would have all your same morals and you Okay, so the reason why I ask this is because all you're going through is nightmares.
Hmm.
These nightmares most likely would not change your positions on most things. So you have your mindset that you have now.
Okay.
So basically, it's kind of like, what if you had the same mindset you have now? You just went through nightmares that turned you into a sociopath and it changed your brain chemistry.
Hmm.
So, like, you could potentially recover from this and heal yourself, but you're just like any other sociopath or psychopath. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, a sociopath doesn't feel the ramifications of of his actions, right? He doesn't fear consequences. But I still have the
Well,
same moral framework.
yeah, the reason why I say sociopath or psychopath is because you don't really know how far gone you are.
Okay.
And quite often people don't know how far gone they are. And yeah, you would have your same framework of your own of what you.
Hmm.
So would you kill somebody?
Knowing who I am, no, I wouldn't.
Now, if you said yes, I would have asked, would you have done it if would you care if you could have gotten caught? And if they said yeah, I would have cared. And then I would have asked, okay, well, why, would you still do this even if you thought you might get caught? Now, okay, so you wouldn't. Okay,
No.
so that's good. So next, so you didn't go through the hypothetical B of that one. So now, next one. What if you could kill this person you didn't like, but somebody you respect would know that you did it? However, you would never get caught, or there's like a next to 0% chance you would get caught.
No, I wouldn't want to kill anyone.
Okay, so that's good. That's good. Okay, so if you said yes, you know, um, all right, I would just accept it there and moved on. So next one is hypothetically, what if you owned a business and your construction business for we will say reinforced steel. Your reinforced steel company. Wait, do you know what reinforced steel is?
I have a general idea, sure.
Okay, you probably have a better idea of maybe what electrical is, right? Electrician.
Okay, yeah.
You own an electrical company. You just got the monopoly in your city of 300,000 people. So a relatively mid-sized city. You have 300,000 people, kind of slightly big. Um, you just got the monopoly on electrical contracts. So that's only inside your city. All your competitions died out, and for commercial construction, you're the only company people can go to. If your accountants showed you paperwork and your marketing team showed you paperwork that you could pay your employees less, make them work longer hours, so approximately 6 to 7 days a week, and approximately 10 to 16 hours a day. If you can make them work like dogs for little increase in pay, would you do it? Little, actually, no, more likely ducking their pay, and trying to pay them less. Would you do it?
I wouldn't, because the increase in their suffering would make a decrease in my happiness.
But you're a sociopath or a psychopath. You feel little to no compassion for them.
But I still hold the same moral values, right?
Ah, okay. See, you're getting this. This is good. This is good. See, now if somebody said hypothetically they wouldn't care, then I would have brought up the fact that I've worked in construction and I've seen people get underpaid and people become undermotivated. People lose their motivation. Journeymen, people with years of experience in construction. People that are masters of their trade. I've seen
Hmm.
them lose their inspiration, their their motivation, and I've seen them fuck up on the job, and I've seen some pretty fucked up shit happen on the job that should have been fucking like what should have happened was they should have destroyed some of the parts that they did, and they should have had to redo some of the stuff that they have done. But in the name of progress, they just kept going, and they it's a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Hmm.
And then I would have just asked them, hypothetically, if you work people to bone, they're going to be more likely to fuck up on the job. They're going to be more tired. They're going to be less motivated. They're probably more likely going to take jobs outside your city that might pay more. And if they say, yeah, I wouldn't care, I'd still go through with it. Then like, okay. Then I ask them, okay, well, hypothetically, what if there was no chance of a huge fucking mistake? Like what if it was a kitchen work where at worst somebody maybe hurts themselves? Like, yeah, you could get sued, but not 100, potentially in a construction problem, hundreds of people can die if you make a mistake. Thousands of people could die. So hypothetically, if you could work people to the bone, and if you knew there wouldn't be like such a tragedy as a potential, would you still work them to the bone? Like, if you knew that wasn't a possibility,
Hmm.
would you work them to the bone if you owned a restaurant? Vince, are you there?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. This is an interesting thought experiment. So, I mean, my intuition would be to say no. I wouldn't.
Okay, so that's good. Okay, so now here's the thing. The reason why I ask all these questions is because I start to relay this back to not only a little bit of my philosophy on masculinity, but basically my philosophy on community. Like, we want to be a part of a community as humans, and even sociopaths can value fairness, and you most likely are an honorable person who values fairness. And even a sociopath or psychopath might not be able to care about somebody, but they might be able to care about what is fair and what they believe in.
Hmm.
So people think you need to have compassion and empathy to have a moral system, but you don't need compassion and empathy to actually have a belief and to value fairness, which can create a collective well-being. Like, the problem is with each of these scenarios I stated, or actually, oh fuck, there's two more. There's a few more hypotheticals I forgot. But I'll finish this little thought. Basically, it's to try and get the individual to challenge their sense of the superiority of themselves versus being a part of a community.
Hmm.
Like, here's another hypothetical. What if you, during a COVID-19 outbreak, you could buy all the hand sanitizer for yourself in a mall? Would you do that?
No,
If you had the, hmm?
I mean, I wouldn't.
Yeah, and what would happen if you did? It's just like buying all the soap. You're just letting the virus spread faster.
Hmm.
It's anti-productive. It's the opposite of what you want. Or another example is like some people say, "Oh, well, I'd buy it all and I'd start selling it back to people." Well, my response to that would be, "Okay, what happens when someone says, "Okay, I'm going to fucking kill you or beat the shit out of you and take your hand sanitizer because I see you're scamming me?" And like I make the point that, even if you had a family, at that point, then you're putting them in danger if you're fucking trying to scam people during a pandemic through supply and demand. Like, it could just like the whole social cohesion could start to unravel if people start to try to scam each other during a pandemic.
Hmm.
So another example is, what if you were hypothetically in a tribe of survivors in a post-apocalyptic world, and all of a sudden a bunch of wolves show up, and you're going to have to fight them with your people. Now you can run and save yourself, or there's a 50% chance you'll survive. Like, would you stay and fight with your people, or would you run? And these people are decent people. You don't know them very well, but they're okay. They're just decent people.
Hmm.
Would you stay and fight?
I would stay and fight.
Okay. So if you ran away, what I would ask is, what would happen if those wolves showed up and you were alone? And these are the things that people don't think about. Like, sure, yeah, don't get me wrong, being self-serving from time to time has its place, but people often forget about the benefits of thinking for the collective. Like, we need to think about our own individual selves, and we need to build ourselves, but people don't think about the collective. People don't think about community. People don't think about any of these things, or the value that it brings oneself. Like, if you think about the community as a whole, it helps you as an individual. And when you're a leader who, let's say, is respected amongst his employees, your employees are going to be less likely to backstab you. They're going to be more likely to look up to you and admire you. They're going to like look at you as if you're a king, you know? They're not going to look at you like you're an evil emperor of Rome. And that's very empowering when people look up to you and people see the fact that you have power and yet you're humble and you're strong and you care about them. When people see that in people, they're going to be more likely to want to work with you for as long as they can than to find a new job and go work for somebody else. And when it comes to like killing people, like murder, like people don't think about the consequences sometimes right away. And if, let's say, you valued taking someone's life over caring about, if you cared more about taking somebody's life than losing the respect of somebody you care about, then that shows that you don't value the people that are in your life. And we all want to be valued at the same time. Like basically human selfishness taken to its worst extreme completely contradicts all of our selfish desires.
Hmm.
You know,
That's interesting.
maybe I could say the same thing about collective. Now, I'm not saying we need to be completely collectivist, but I'm just saying people forget about the benefits of thinking about the collective. And I could relay this to veganism. Like, we don't think about the benefits that it gives ourselves when we go vegan. We're not only do our health, we're not only is it better for your own body, but on top of that, it's better for the environment. It's better for it's also, I believe, it's ethically superior as well. And just let's just go down the environment rabbit hole. Like, it's better for the environment as a whole, and for it being better for the environment and more efficient economically as well, it's probably going to be more likely to it's going to be more likely to make food in the long run more economically affordable rather
Hmm.
than subsidizing expensive meat. And all these things we don't think about it when we sort of go to the supermarket and buy our favorite meat or whatnot. And on top of that, like, if we live in a society where everyone basically doesn't need a justification, and if anyone believes in might makes right, like, we live in a society of potential sociopaths. Like, when I wanted to kill somebody, there was one moment where I almost fucking did it as a kid, and it was like 99% of me wanted to kill somebody, but there was 1% of me that was stronger than the 99%. I felt like Magneto, like I felt like I was Wolverine, and Magneto was pushing me back against a wall, and everything in my body wanted to rip Magneto to shreds. But I'm Wolverine. I physically cannot move. I felt like a vampire wanting to tear out someone's neck, but somehow resisting. Like, to this day, it still doesn't make sense. I felt like I was frozen. Like, there was a
Interesting.
moment where I snapped and I was going to fucking kill him, but I just stopped, and I don't know how. I don't know why.
Hmm.
And my body went on autopilot.
So
Like, I nearly, but just in general, my whole point that I'm trying to get to is if you had the mentality that you're going to do everything for yourself, if you were pushed to that extent, how do you know you wouldn't harm your own family? How do you know you wouldn't harm the people you care about? And that's just it. You probably would. So by being not only being more ethical, you restrict human barbarism. And by restricting human barbarism, not only is it better for yourself as a whole and the people you care about around you, but it's also better for society as a whole. So that's kind of like the argumentation I generally go down.
hmm that's a good that's
I thought
a go for it.
I thought you might like this because everyone has told me that my argumentation is very unique because, like, I can relate to the pigs eating one another.
Hmm.
So, like, it's giving me a unique perspective on insanity and how to perhaps tackle apathy.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think this is where, unfortunately, we're gonna have to leave off the podcast because
All right, so keep in contact. Maybe join the Discord servers and come in there and hang out sometime. So I'll chat with you later, and I'll send you the audio.
all right, sounds good, man. Thanks for coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure.